She crossed a continent for a promise whispered in a letter, a photograph of a handsome cowboy, and the dream of a family to call her own. But the man who met her at the end of the line wasn't a husband. He was a ghost, haunted by secrets he would take to his grave. Left with his 2 orphan children on a dying patch of Arizona desert, she was a mail-order bride with no groom, a mother with no ring. This is the harrowing true-life drama of Adeline Dubois, a woman abandoned in the merciless heart of the West, who had to fight the land, the law, and the ghosts of the past to protect a family that was never meant to be hers. The heat was the first thing Adeline Dubois noticed. It was not the humid, forgiving warmth of her native New Orleans, but a dry, suffocating blanket that seemed to press down from a bleached white sky, stealing the very moisture from her lungs. It shimmered in waves above the cracked earth, distorting the ragged collection of wooden buildings that constituted the town of Redemption, Arizona. The name, she thought, with a flicker of weary hope, had to be a good omen. Her journey had been a long and bruising one. Days on a rattling train, nights in questionable boarding houses, every mile taking her further from the familiar and deeper into the vast, intimidating emptiness of the American West. Clutched in her gloved hand was the letter that had started it all, its creases softened by countless readings. It was from a man named Caleb Blackwood. His penmanship was surprisingly neat, his words direct and unadorned. He wrote of his ranch, a place of good water and strong grass, of his 2 children, Isaac and Martha, who needed a mother's touch. His photograph showed a man in his early 30s, his face weathered by the sun with kind eyes that seemed to hold a hint of sadness. He didn't promise riches, only a life of hard work, partnership, and family. For Adeline, an orphan who had spent her life as a seamstress living in the shadow of other people's happiness. It was more than enough. It was everything. A portly man with a sweat-stained hat heaved her trunk onto the dusty platform. "Blackwood Place, you say?" he grunted, eyeing her fine, albeit travel-worn dress. "It's a good 5 miles out. He ain't come to meet you." Adeline's heart gave a little flutter of anxiety. I suppose he was detained with ranch work," she said, forcing a smile. The man shrugged, pointing a thick finger towards a barely-there trail winding into the scrub. "Follow that path. Can't miss it. Only ranch out that way? Not much else but dust and rattlers." With a deep breath that did little to calm her nerves, Adeline paid the man, picked up her smaller valise, and began her walk. The hem of her dress was instantly coated in a fine red st. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the crunch of her own boots and the occasional buzz of an insect. It was a formidable landscape, all jagged mesas and skeletal cacti reaching for the sky like desperate hands. An hour later, when her hope was beginning to fray, she saw it. The Blackwood Ranch. Her heart sank. The strong grass Caleb had written of was patchy and yellowed. The house was a simple unpainted clapboard structure smaller than the photograph had suggested, with a porch that sagged on one side. A lone, tired-looking horse stood tethered to a post head bowed against the oppressive sun. This was not the thriving homestead of her dreams. This was a place that was struggling to survive. As she approached, the front door creaked open. A boy of about 10, with his father's dark hair and a fiercely guarded expression, stepped out onto the porch. He was followed by a small girl, perhaps 6, who clung to his trousers, peering at Adeline from behind his leg. "You the woman?" the boy asked, his voice rough for his age. Yes, I am Miss Dubois. Adeline." She corrected herself, trying to sound warm. "And you must be Isaac, and this must be Martha." She smiled at the little girl, who only burrowed deeper behind her brother. Before she could say more, the man from the photograph emerged from the gloom of the house. Caleb Blackwood was taller in person, but the kindness in his eyes seemed to have been extinguished, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. He looked older than his picture, the lines around his eyes and mouth etched deeper by worry than by sun. "Miss Dubois," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You made it." "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. The grand speech she had prepared, full of hope and future plans, died on her lips. The air was thick with a tension she couldn't name. "Get inside, both of you," Caleb said to the children, his tone leaving no room for argument. They scurried past him into the house without a backward glance. He gestured for Adeline to sit on a worn bench on the porch. But he remained standing, his hands shoved into his pockets, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's a long journey," she began, attempting to fill the chasm of silence between them. "The land is very different." "It's a hard land," he stated, not looking at her. "It takes more than it gives." The afternoon wore on in a series of stilted, uncomfortable exchanges. Adeline was shown to a small, stark room with a bed and a basin. She tried to engage the children, but Isaac watched her with open suspicion, while Martha remained a silent shadow. The supper they shared was a somber affair of beans and dry cornbread eaten in near silence. The house was clean but bare, lacking any of the small comforts that turned a house into a home. There were no curtains on the windows, no pictures on the walls. It felt like a place no one intended to stay in for long. That night, unable to sleep, Adeline sat on her bed, the letter in her lap. The words that had once seemed so full of promise now felt like a cruel deception. This was not a man seeking a partner. This was a man drowning, and she had just been thrown into the water beside him. She was startled by a soft knock on her door. It was Caleb. He stood in the hallway, silhouetted by the moonlight streaming through the main room window. "I need to talk to you, Miss Dubois," he said, his voice heavy. He led her back out to the porch where the desert air had finally cooled. The sky was a vast expanse of brilliant, glittering stars, a stark and beautiful contrast to the hardship on the ground. "I haven't been honest with you," he began, his voice cracking with an emotion he could no longer contain. "I apologize for that. When I wrote to you, things were different. I thought I could make it work." He finally turned to face her, and in the pale moonlight she could see the raw anguish in his face. "There's a debt, an old one, from before this place, before the children's mother passed. It's a matter of honor, a score that has to be settled. I thought I'd paid it, but the man, he's come back to collect." "A debt?" Adeline whispered. "Can we not pay him? I have a little money saved." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "It's not that kind of debt, miss. It's not paid with money." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "I have to leave. I have to ride out and meet him. Settle it once and for all?" A cold dread washed over Adeline. "Leave, but you just brought me here." "I know," he said, his voice thick with shame. "It's a terrible thing to do to you. I'm a coward. I should have told you not to come. But I was desperate. The children, they can't be left alone." He looked at her then, a desperate plea in his eyes. "I will be back. I swear it on my life. It might take a week, maybe 2. Can you just watch over them? Please, the ranch all but runs itself for a spell. There's enough food stocked. Please, Adeline." It was the first time he had used her name, and it felt like a brand. He was asking the impossible. She was a stranger, a city woman completely unprepared for this life. She knew nothing of ranches of deserts, of raising 2 grieving, wary children. Her mind screamed at her to refuse to demand he'd take her back to redemption at first light. But then she thought of Isaac's defiant face and Martha's terrified eyes. She thought of her own life, a long, lonely road of self-reliance. She had come here seeking a family, and in the most twisted way imaginable, one had just been thrust upon her. Looking into Caleb Blackwood's desperate face, she saw not a deceiver, but a man trapped by his own past. Against her better judgment, against every instinct for self-preservation, she heard herself say, "I will stay. I'll watch the children." A wave of relief washed over his features so profound it almost brought him to his knees. "Thank you," he breathed. "God bless you. There's a rifle by the door. You likely won't need it, but it's there. Don't trust anyone from the Corrigan Ranch to the north. Just keep to yourselves. I will be back." Before dawn, he was gone. Adeline stood on the sagging porch watching as he rode away, a solitary figure shrinking into the vast, indifferent landscape. The rising sun cast long, ominous shadows across the yard. She was alone, the unwilling guardian of 2 children who didn't want her, and a ranch that was already failing. The promise of redemption had evaporated with the morning mist, leaving only the stark, terrifying reality of the desert. The first week was a silent war. Isaac, with the grave solemnity of a 10-year-old forced into manhood too soon, treated Adeline not as a guardian, but as an intruder. He performed his chores, mending the flimsy fence, feeding the few scrawny chickens, with a grim determination, his silence a wall she could not breach. He spoke to her only when necessary, his answers clipped and grudging. He was the man of the house now, and his eyes made it clear she was a temporary unwelcome guest. Martha was a different challenge. The little girl was a ghost in her own home, flitting from room to room, with a thumb perpetually in her mouth. She wouldn't speak at all, her large dark eyes following Adeline's every move with a mixture of fear and sorrow. Adeline tried everything. She sang the lullabies her own mother had sung to her. She offered to read from the one children's book she had brought. She even tried to fashion a small doll from scraps of fabric. But Martha would only shrink away, her silence more heartbreaking than any angry word. Adeline poured her own fear and frustration into work. She scrubbed the small house from top to bottom, beat the dust from the rugs, and mended the children's worn clothing until her fingers were raw. She learned the rhythm of the ranch through trial and error. She discovered the agonizing labor of hauling buckets of water from the deep stone-lined well, her soft city hands quickly becoming calloused and blistered. She learned that the chickens laid precious few eggs, and that the vegetable patch was a constant battle against a relentless sun and voracious insects. Every evening she would stand on the porch and scan the horizon, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. A week passed, then 10 days. There was no sign of Caleb Blackwood. The emptiness of the desert began to feel less like a space and more like a presence, a watchful entity waiting for her to fail. Her meager savings were dwindling. She had used some to buy flour and beans from a traveling peddler whose exorbitant prices were a clear exploitation of her isolation. The ranch was an island, and she was stranded on it. One sweltering afternoon, driven by a gnawing worry about their finances. Adeline decided to search Caleb's room. It felt like a violation, but necessity had eroded her sense of propriety. The room was as Spartan as the rest of the house, containing only a bed, a small wardrobe, and a simple wooden desk. It was in the desk drawer that she found the ledgers. As she spread the worn books on the dusty surface, the full picture of Caleb's desperation came into sharp focus. The entries written in his neat script told a story of mounting failure. He had borrowed heavily to buy the ranch. The notes detailed poor yields cattle lost to disease and the ever-present cost of supplies. The final pages were a litany of debts owed to the general store in redemption, to the blacksmith, and most significantly, a large and recurring debt to a man named Bartholomew Bart Corrigan, the name from Caleb's warning. Beneath the ledgers, she found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were not from her. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, and flowing. The ink faded with time. With a trembling hand, she untied the ribbon and read one. It was a love letter full of shared memories and passionate declarations, signed simply, "Your Rosalind." These were from the children's mother. Reading them felt like trespassing on sacred ground, a painful reminder of the family that had existed here before her, the love that had filled these now silent rooms. She put them away, a profound sense of sorrow for the woman and her lost life washing over her. At the very bottom of the drawer, tucked away beneath a false bottom, she discovered by accident was a small locked metal box. It was heavy and old. She shook it, but it made no sound. There was no key. What secrets did it hold? Money, a deed, or something else entirely? The box became a symbol of the mystery of Caleb Blackwood, a man who had brought her across a country only to vanish, leaving her with his children, his debts, and his secrets. Her grim discoveries were interrupted by a sound from outside the steady beat of a horse's hooves, heavier and more confident than a lone rider. Peeking through the grimy window, Adeline saw two men approaching. One was a broad-shouldered man with a florid face and a finely tailored duster riding a magnificent black stallion. The other was slighter with a silver star glinting on his vest. The sheriff. Adeline's heart pounded against her ribs. She took the rifle from its place by the door, its weight unfamiliar and menacing in her hands, and stepped onto the porch. Isaac immediately came to stand beside her, his small face a mask of defiance. The man on the stallion tipped his hat a gesture that was more mockery than politeness. "Ma'am, I'm Bartholomew Corrigan. This here is Sheriff Brody. We've come to see Mr. Blackwood." "He's not here." Adeline said, her voice steadier than she felt. The rifle was a clumsy shield, but it gave her a sliver of courage. Corrigan's eyes, small and shrewd, swept over the ranch, taking in the parched ground and the sagging porch with a dismissive air. "Not here. That's a shame. He and I have business, a significant and long overdue debt." He smiled a thin, predatory expression. "This land, you see, the water rights. He put them up as collateral." Sheriff Brody shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now, Bart, maybe we should wait for Caleb to return." "Return?" Corrigan chuckled a low, unpleasant sound. "Men like Blackwood who run from their obligations, they don't often return, Sheriff. They just find new places to dig new holes." He looked directly at Adeline, his gaze lingering on the rifle. "You're the mail-order bride, I take it, poor thing. He seems to have abandoned you along with his other responsibilities. Tell you what, I'm a reasonable man. I'll give him 1 more month. 30 days. If the debt isn't paid in full by then, this ranch and everything on it becomes the property of Corrigan Cattle Company." He didn't wait for a reply. With a nod to the sheriff, he wheeled his horse around to Suzanne and trotted away, leaving a cloud of dust and dread in his wake. Sheriff Brody offered Adeline a helpless, apologetic look before following. 30 days. The words echoed in the oppressive silence. Adeline looked at the parched earth, at the 2 frightened children beside her, at the locked box in the house that might hold an answer, or might hold nothing at all. Caleb wasn't coming back in a week or 2. The story about settling a score of honor was a lie, a thin veil to cover the truth she now held in her hands in the form of his ledgers. He hadn't gone to settle a debt. He had fled from it, and he had left her Adeline Dubois, a seamstress from New Orleans, to face the consequences. She looked at Isaac, who was staring after Corrigan with pure, unadulterated hatred. For the first time he looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not suspicion, but a shared fear. The war between them was over. A new, more desperate one had just begun. The 30-day deadline settled over the Blackwood Ranch like a shroud. Each sunrise was a stark reminder of time slipping away, each sunset a victory for Bart Corrigan. The fragile truce between Adeline and Isaac, born of shared fear, slowly blossomed into a practical, unspoken alliance. He began to talk to her not with warmth, but with a pragmatism that belied his age. He showed her which plants were safe for the chickens to eat, how to reinforce the flimsy coop against coyotes, and where the ground was softest for digging. He was teaching her how to survive in his world. Martha remained a silent observer, but a change was occurring in her as well. She no longer hid when Adeline entered a room. She would sit quietly in the corner watching Adeline cook or mend her small doll clutched in her hands. One evening, as Adeline struggled to light the temperamental stove, Martha padded over and handed her a small, dry twig. It was the first offering a tiny bridge across the gulf of her silence. Adeline's heart ached with a love so fierce it startled her. These were not his children anymore. In her heart, they were becoming hers. The true crisis arrived not on horseback, but from deep within the earth. Midway through the second week, the well began to fail. The water, once clear and cold, became muddy and sparse. The daily labor of hauling buckets became a desperate back-breaking exercise for diminishing returns. Adeline knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that without water, Corrigan wouldn't need to wait 30 days. The desert would claim them first. Desperation drove her to redemption. Leaving Isaac in charge with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the rifle close, she hitched the old, tired horse to the rickety wagon and made the long, dusty journey into town. Redemption was no more welcoming than before. Faces turned to stare as she guided the wagon down the main street. She was the woman from the Blackwood place, the abandoned mail-order bride. Whispers followed her like flies. She went first to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Brody was sitting behind his desk, looking weary. He listened to her story about the well and Corrigan's threat with a pained expression. "Ma'am," he said, rubbing his temples. "Bart Corrigan. He basically owns this town. The bank, the freight company. Most folks owe him something. My hands are tied. The debt is legal. The contract is on file. If Blackwood doesn't pay, the land is his. There's nothing I can do." "He's trying to run us off before the deadline," Adeline insisted, her voice rising. "He's stealing our water. Isn't that against the law?" "Can you prove it?" the sheriff asked quietly. "Can you prove he's the one who diverted the creek upstream that feeds your aquifer? That's what you'd have to do. And no one in this valley is going to testify against Bart Corrigan." Defeated, she left the office, the weight of injustice pressing down on her. Her last hope was the town doctor. She had seen his shingle on her way in Dr. Alastair Finch. She found him in his small clinic, a man with graying hair, spectacles, and intelligent, tired eyes. He was tending to a blacksmith with a burned hand. She waited, and when he was finished, she told him her story. She didn't ask for help, not directly. She simply laid out the facts of her situation, her voice low and steady. He listened patiently, dabbing his instruments with a clean cloth. "I remember Caleb Blackwood, doctor," Finch said when she was done. "A troubled man, always seemed to be looking over his shoulder. And I know Bart Corrigan. He's a cancer on this territory." He looked at her, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You are in an impossible situation, Miss Dubois." "I am aware of that, doctor," she replied. He seemed to appreciate her lack of hysterics. "The well," he mused. "Sometimes a well doesn't go dry. Sometimes it just hits a layer of hardpan clay. If you can get through it, you might find a deeper aquifer." He paused. "It would require dynamite." Adeline's eyes widened. "Dynamite? It's dangerous, very dangerous, but possible. The mining supply office sells it, but they won't sell to you, not without a claim and a permit. And they're part of Corrigan's web." He looked at her hands, at the calluses and broken nails. "You are a woman of surprising resolve, Miss Dubois, but some things cannot be resolved through sheer will alone." He couldn't give her dynamite, but he gave her something else. He sold her laudanum for Martha's persistent cough and gave her a small bag of quinine, just in case. He refused her money for the medicine. As she was leaving, he pressed a small, heavy object into her hand. It was a sturdy, well-made shovel head. "The handle on your wagon shovel looked like it was about to split," he said gruffly. "A good tool is a small prayer in a place like this." The journey back to the ranch was one of grim determination. Dr. Finch's words echoed in her mind. Get through it. If she couldn't go around Corrigan's malice, she would have to go through the very earth itself. When she returned, she found Isaac on the porch rifle across his lap, a stoic little soldier guarding his home. The sight filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, She told him the doctor's theory about the hardpan clay. "We have to dig," she said. "We have to make the well deeper." Isaac looked at her as if she'd gone mad. "That's a man's work. It's too deep. It's dangerous." "All of this is dangerous," she countered. "Doing nothing is the most dangerous thing of all. I will go down. You will stay up top and haul the buckets of dirt. We will do it together." The next morning, the impossible work began. Using the pulley system already in place, Adeline had Isaac lower her down into the dark, damp shaft of the well. The air was cool and smelled of wet stone and earth. It was terrifying. The walls were slick, and the space was claustrophobically tight. But with the doctor's shovel head attached to a new, sturdy handle, she began to dig. She would dig for an hour, filling the bucket with thick, wet clay, and then Isaac, his small arms straining, would haul it up, empty it, and lower it back down. It was agonizing, back-breaking work. Her muscles screamed in protest, and every shadow in the dark shaft seemed to hold a new terror. Days blurred into a cycle of digging, hauling, and aching exhaustion. Martha would bring them water from their dwindling barrels, her small face a mask of worry. But something was shifting. Isaac no longer saw her as an intruder. He saw her as a partner, a fighter. His orders became questions. His silence became conversation. One afternoon, after nearly a week of this torturous labor, her shovel hit something different. Not the soft suck of clay, but a hard, grating clink. Rock. Solid, unforgiving rock. She had not found a deeper aquifer. She had found the end of the line. Defeated, covered in mud and despair, she let Isaac haul her out of the well. She lay on the ground, gasping for air, the tears she had held back for so long, finally streaming down her face, mixing with the dirt. It was over. They had lost. Isaac stood over her, his own face streaked with grime. He looked down at her, then over at the house, then at the vast, merciless sky. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. Instead, he walked over to the woodpile, picked up his father's axe, and began methodically chopping firewood for the night. It was a simple act, but it was a declaration. They might be defeated, but they were not yet broken. He was still here. They were still together. And as Adeline watched him, a new, harder resolve began to form in her heart. If they couldn't dig for water, they would have to fight for it. The weeks after hitting rock in the well were the bleakest yet. The deadline loomed a black cloud on the horizon. They rationed their barrel water with a miser's care, each drop precious. Adeline's hope, once a steady flame, had dwindled to a faint ember, shielded against the harsh wind of reality. She spent her days trying to project a calm she did not feel for the children's sake, and her nights staring at the locked metal box, wrestling with the temptation to smash it open with the back of an axe. What if it held the answer? What if it held nothing? The uncertainty was its own form of torture. There had been no word of Caleb. The story of his honorable quest to settle a debt now seemed like a child's fairy tale. He had abandoned them. That was the simple, brutal truth. He had lured her into a trap and then sprung it shut, leaving her to perish with his children. The sorrow she had once felt for him had curdled into a hard, bitter anger. One blisteringly hot afternoon, as the sun hung directly overhead, bleaching all color from the landscape, Adeline was trying to coax a few withered vegetables from the parched garden. Isaac was inside, attempting to fix a broken chair leg, while Martha sat on the porch step, listlessly drawing patterns in the dust. It was Martha who saw it first. She let out a small gasp and pointed a trembling finger toward the trail. Adeline straightened up her hand, shielding her eyes against the glare. A figure was approaching, not on a horse, but on foot, a lone traveler moving with a slow, weary gait, silhouetted against the shimmering heat haze. Adeline's heart leaped into her throat. Caleb. But as the figure drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was smaller, slighter than Caleb. It was a woman. She was dressed in dusty, practical riding skirts, her face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. She carried no weapon that Adeline could see, only a small bundle slung over her shoulder. Isaac came to the door, sensing the change in the atmosphere. The woman stopped a few yards from the porch, her eyes taking in the scene, the struggling garden, the silent children, and Adeline standing like a sentinel with a dirt-smudged face and calloused hands. She was perhaps a few years older than Adeline, with high cheekbones, skin the color of burnished copper, and dark, exhausted eyes that seemed to hold a deep and abiding sorrow. "I am looking for the Blackwood Ranch," the woman said. Her English was clear, but accented with the lyrical cadence of Spanish. "This is it," Adeline replied, her voice taut with suspicion. "Who's asking?" The woman's gaze fell upon Isaac and Martha, and a look of profound, heart-stopping emotion washed over her face. It was a look of anguish of recognition, of a pain so deep it was almost holy. Her eyes filled with tears. "Isaac," she whispered the name, a fragile prayer. "Martita." Martha, who had not spoken a full sentence since Adeline's arrival, scrambled to her feet. Her eyes were wide, her face a canvas of confusion and dawning memory. "Mama," the word, small and uncertain, hung in the still, hot air. Adeline felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Mama," the woman, her face crumbling with a grief that had been held in check for years, took a stumbling step forward. "Si, mija, it is Mama." This was not a stranger. This was a ghost. A ghost from the letters Adeline had found, the elegant script now given a face and a voice. This was Rosaline, or as she now introduced herself, her voice trembling. "My name is Rosalita Vargas." She sank to her knees in the dust, her arms outstretched. Isaac remained frozen, his face a storm of conflicting emotions, but Martha, with a cry that seemed to tear loose from the very depths of her soul, ran from the porch and threw herself into the woman's arms. They clung to each other, a mother and daughter reunited, their sobs echoing in the vast silence of the desert. Adeline stood as if turned to stone, her mind reeling, trying to piece together the impossible. Caleb's wife, the children's mother, was supposed to be dead. He had told her so in his letters. He had told the children so. It was the foundation upon which Adeline's entire miserable situation had been built. Later, after the raw emotion had subsided into a fragile, exhausted calm, they sat inside at the kitchen table. Rosalita held a sleeping Martha in her lap, stroking her hair as she spoke, her eyes never leaving her children. Isaac sat stiffly watching her, the wall around his heart clearly cracking. Rosalita's story unspooled a tale of love betrayal and relentless hope. She and Caleb had been married in a small mission in Sonora, Mexico. They had been happy at first, but Caleb had a restless spirit, a hunger for land and status that gnawed at him. He grew resentful of their simple life. "He was a good man once," Rosalita said, her voice soft and full of sorrow. "But he had a shadow in his heart, a pride. He wanted to be a great man, a landowner. He said there was no future for us in Mexico." The fighting started. He became a different person, angry, secretive. One day, after a terrible argument, he had simply disappeared, and he had taken the children with him. "He stole them." Rosalita stated the word simple and devastating. "He took my children and vanished. I looked everywhere. I followed rumors, whispers. For 3 years I have been searching. I heard a rumor of a man named Blackwood with 2 small children in Arizona. It took me months to find this place. I walked the last 20 miles from the stagecoach stop." The pieces clicked into place in Adeline's mind with sickening clarity. Caleb's haunted eyes, his secrecy, his desperation. The debt of honor was a lie. He hadn't gone to settle a score. He had likely heard that Rosalita was getting close, that his past was catching up to him. He had fled just as he had fled from her. And Adeline, she was the final, cruelest piece of his plan. He needed someone to care for them, Adeline said, her voice hollow. someone who wouldn't ask questions, a stranger. A mail-order bride, Rosalita finished her eyes meeting Adeline's. In them, Adeline saw not an adversary, but a fellow victim. Another woman betrayed by the lies of Caleb Blackwood. The foundation of Adeline's world had been a lie. Her sacrifice, her back-breaking labor, the love she had cultivated for these children. It was all built on a fiction crafted by a coward. She wasn't their guardian or their stepmother. She was their jailer, an unwitting accomplice to a kidnapping. The truth was a bitter pill, a poison that spread through her veins. She had come to the desert to find a family, and had instead found herself in the middle of the wreckage of another's. And now the woman who had every right to despise her, to cast her out, was sitting at her table, her eyes full of a pain that mirrored Adeline's own. Two women from two different worlds, bound together by the same man's deceit and their shared love for the children caught between them. The desert had brought them to a reckoning that neither could have imagined. The air in the small house grew thick with the weight of unspoken things. Rosalita's arrival had shattered the fragile reality Adeline had constructed. Every sacrifice Adeline had made, every callus on her hands, now felt like a testament to her own foolishness. She had been tending another woman's children, defending another woman's home, all based on a lie. A bitter resentment, cold and sharp, warred with a profound sympathy for the woman sitting across from her. Rosalita, for her part, was not the accuser Adeline had feared. The fire of her initial desperation had banked into a quiet, bone-deep weariness. She watched Adeline move about the kitchen, preparing a meager meal of beans and the last of the cornmeal, and saw not a rival, but a woman who had clearly fought for her children. She saw the mended clothes, the clean floors, the exhaustion etched onto Adeline's face. The first day was a careful dance of avoidance and observation. Isaac was the fulcrum of the tension. He was torn between the primal half-forgotten pull toward the mother of his infancy and his fierce, hard-won loyalty to the woman who had gone down into the well for him. He watched them both, his young face a mask of confusion and pain. The confrontation came the next day, not in a storm of angry words, but in the oppressive quiet of the afternoon. Martha was napping her small hand, clutching a fold of her mother's skirt. Isaac was outside, staring at the horizon, as if waiting for a ghost to appear. "He lied to me," Adeline said, finally breaking the silence. She was standing by the window, twisting a dishcloth in her hands. "He told me you were dead. He showed me a grave." Rosalita flinched, the pain fresh. "There is no grave. He told the children the same. He wanted to erase me." She looked at Adeline, her dark eyes searching. "You have been good to them. I can see it. Martha." "Why? She has not felt safe in a long time. She feels safe with you." The admission was a peace offering. "I love them." Adeline confessed the words raw and vulnerable. "When I came here, I had nothing. No one. They have become everything." "They are my everything." Rosalita countered, her voice gentle but firm. "I have walked through hell to find them." There it was, the heart of the matter. Two mothers, one of blood and one of bond, with two children caught in the middle. What happened now? Was Adeline expected to simply pack her meager belongings and walk away back to a life of loneliness? The thought was a physical blow. Their fragile, tense peace was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. It was Bart Corrigan, and this time he was not alone. He had the sheriff with him, along with two grim-faced ranch hands. He wasn't waiting for the deadline. He had come to claim his prize. "Ma'am," Corrigan said, dismounting and striding onto the porch, as if he already owned it. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Rosalita, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. "Looks like you have company. No matter. The deadline is academic. I have it on good authority that Blackwood has fled the territory. That constitutes abandonment of the debt. Sheriff Brody has the foreclosure papers. The ranch is mine." Sheriff Brody looked deeply uncomfortable, refusing to meet Adeline's gaze. "It's legal, ma'am. He's right." Panic, cold and absolute, seized Adeline. It was over. All the work, the sacrifice it was, for nothing. They would be cast out with nothing into the merciless desert. "This is not Caleb Blackwood's land to forfeit," a voice said, strong and clear. It was Rosalita. She stepped forward, placing herself between Corrigan and the door, a protective lioness. "I am his wife, Rosalita Vargas Blackwood. Under territorial law, this is community property. He cannot sign it away without my consent." Corrigan laughed, a coarse, ugly sound. "His wife, lady, the whole town knows his wife is dead and buried. He brought this mail-order bride in to replace her." He gestured dismissively at Adeline. "He is a liar and a kidnapper." Rosalita shot back, her voice ringing with conviction. "He stole my children from me 3 years ago. I am very much alive, and I am their mother." The sheriff looked startled, his eyes darting between the two women. This complicated things. Corrigan, however, was unfazed. "A fanciful story," he sneered. "But it changes nothing. Do you have proof of this marriage? A piece of paper without it. You're just another squatter. Now get out of my way." He took a step forward, but Adeline moved to stand beside Rosalita. They stood together, a united front of defiance, but they had no weapon. No defense against the sham legality Corrigan wielded. And then Adeline remembered the locked box. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling with a sudden desperate hope. "There might be something." She rushed inside to Caleb's room and retrieved the heavy metal box. She brought it out onto the porch and set it on the floor. "It's locked," she said, looking from Rosalita to Corrigan. "I never found a key." Isaac, who had been watching the entire scene with wide, frightened eyes, suddenly spoke. "Papa's key," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He wore it on a leather string. He told me never to touch it." He looked at his mother, at Rosalita. "He hid it after you were gone." Isaac ran inside. A moment later he returned carrying a small, grimy leather pouch. Inside was a single ornate brass key. With trembling hands, Adeline fitted it into the lock of the metal box. It turned with a satisfying click. She lifted the heavy lid. The contents were not what she expected. There was no money, no gold. Instead, there was a stack of papers. On top was a marriage certificate from a mission in Sonora, documenting the union of Caleb Blackwood and Rosalita Vargas. Rosalita let out a choked sob, taking the paper in her hands. It was the proof she needed. But there was more. Beneath the certificate was another older document. It was a deed. But not a deed from Caleb to Corrigan. It was the original deed to the ranch, signed and notarized over 20 years prior. The land had been a grant to Caleb's father, a veteran of the Indian Wars. And in a crucial handwritten addendum, the father, knowing his own son's feckless nature, had bequeathed the land not to Caleb, but directly to any and all of his legal heirs. The land did not belong to Caleb Blackwood. It belonged to his children. And at the very bottom, there was a letter, a confession. It was written in Caleb's hand, dated the day he left. He detailed his lies, his theft of the children, and his flight from both his debts and his past. "I am a coward," it read. "I have wronged everyone. The land is not mine to give or to lose. It belongs to Isaac and Martha. May God forgive me, because they never will." Adeline held the deed and the confession out for the sheriff to see. "Read it," she commanded, her voice shaking with righteous fury. "Read it all." Sheriff Brody took the papers, his face paling as he read. Corrigan tried to snatch them, but the sheriff held them tight. He read the deed, the addendum, and finally Caleb's signed confession. He looked up, his face a mixture of shock and shame. He looked at Bart Corrigan, then at the two women and the children. For the first time he stood up straight, the silver star on his chest seeming to gleam a little brighter. "Corrigan," the sheriff said, his voice hard as iron, "this foreclosure is void. The debt is Caleb Blackwood's personal responsibility, but the collateral he offered was never his to give. This land belongs to these children. You have no claim here." Bart Corrigan's face contorted in a mask of disbelief and rage. "That's preposterous a trick. That letter is a forgery." "It's in his own hand, Bart." Sheriff Brody said, his voice low and dangerous. He folded the documents carefully. "The signature matches the one on the debt contract you hold, and this deed is ironclad. It was filed with the Territorial Office 20 years ago. You try to fight this, and you'll be the one facing a judge for attempting to seize property through fraudulent means." The two ranch hands behind Corrigan shifted, looking at their employer, and then at the sheriff, their loyalty clearly wavering in the face of the law. Corrigan was a powerful man, but he was not more powerful than a legal deed and a shamed sheriff finally doing his duty. For a long moment, Corrigan stood frozen, his mind clearly racing for another angle, another threat. But he found none. He looked at the united front before him, the stony-faced sheriff and the two women. One with her marriage certificate clutched to her chest, the other holding a confession like a shield, standing shoulder to shoulder, guarding the two children for whom they had both fought. He was defeated. With a guttural curse, Corrigan spun on his heel, wrenched his horse's reins, and mounted in a single furious motion. "This isn't over!" He snarled a promise that held no weight. He spurred his horse viciously and galloped away his men, trailing uncertainly behind him, leaving a cloud of angry dust to settle in the still air. Silence descended upon the porch, a profound and ringing quiet after the storm. Sheriff Brody cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. He handed the deed and the confession back to Adeline. "Ma'am, Miss Dubois?" "Senora Blackwood." He began fumbling with his hat. "I apologize. I was content to enforce the law as it was presented to me. I never looked deeper." He looked at Adeline and Rosalita with a newfound respect. "The law will recognize you both as the children's legal guardians. This land is yours to manage in their name. I'll file the necessary protections at the county seat myself. No one will bother you again." With a final solemn nod, he too mounted his horse and rode away, leaving the new, strange, and utterly unexpected family alone on their porch. In the days that followed, the rhythm of the ranch changed. The desperate, frantic energy was replaced by a slow, deliberate rebuilding. The tension between Adeline and Rosalita did not vanish overnight, but it softened, transformed by their shared victory and the undeniable reality of their situation. They were two different women from different worlds, bound by a shared love for two children and a piece of land that had demanded so much from them both. Rosalita, who had grown up on a hacienda, knew things about the land that Adeline did not. She showed Adeline how to read the sky for rain, how to find the faint, almost invisible signs of underground water. Adeline, with her quiet organizational skills, managed their dwindling supplies with a meticulous care that made every bean and every grain of flour last. Isaac, his internal conflict largely resolved, blossomed under the care of his two mothers. He began to smile more, the heavy burden of responsibility lifted from his small shoulders. He taught Adeline Spanish words that Rosalita had taught him, and he listened fascinated as Adeline told him stories of the bustling, steamy city of New Orleans. The true miracle happened a week later. Following a hunch of Rosalita's, a place where the hardy desert sage grew unusually thick, they began to dig again. Not in the old well, but a new spot a few hundred yards from the house. They didn't have dynamite, but they had 4 determined hands. Adeline and Rosalita took turns with the shovel, while Isaac hauled the dirt. For 2 days they dug, fueled by a shared, unspoken hope. On the 3rd day, Adeline's shovel, instead of hitting rock, sank into thick, wet mud. A moment later, a small, dark trickle of water began to seep into the bottom of the hole. With a shared cry of triumph, they dug faster frantically, and the trickle became a steady seep, and the seep became a pool. They had found water. Clear, sweet, life-giving water. That evening, the 4 of them stood by the new well, as the sun set, painting the mesas in hues of orange and purple. The desert, which had for so long been their enemy, now seemed to offer a quiet blessing. This was not the family Adeline had envisioned when she read Caleb's letters, nor the one Rosalita had prayed to have returned to her. It was something new, something forged in deception and hardship, tempered by love and resilience. A mail-order bride who never married a resurrected mother, and 2 children of the desert. They were a strange and broken family, but they were whole. Standing there on the land that was truly theirs, watching the first star appear in the violet sky. Adeline Dubois knew she was finally home. The story of Adeline Dubois and Rosalita Vargas is a powerful testament to the strength of women who were so often erased from the histories of the American West. It's a story that proves family isn't always about blood, but about the bonds forged in fire, the promises kept when all others are broken. If their incredible journey from strangers to saviors, from victims to victors, has moved you, please take a moment to honor their legacy. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with others who appreciate tales of true grit and survival, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to unearthing more forgotten stories of the pioneers who truly shaped the heart of America, one impossible challenge at a time. Your support allows us to keep these vital histories alive. Thank you for listening.